All right, in this video, we're going to take a look at keyframe animation. By the end of the video, you're going to have a good, solid understanding as to what keyframe animation is. You're going to know how to apply keyframe animation to any object in your scene. And finally, you're going to have an understanding as to what's happening under Maya's hood when you do keyframe animation. So first of all, what is keyframe animation? It's very important to understand that. Well, it's nothing more than recording values, attribute values, at specific points in time. It's that simple. It's just a recording. Bink, I've recorded a value. That easy.
You're telling Maya, at this time, I want this value to be this.
That's right. So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to come over here into Photoshop. I'm going to use this as our whiteboard. And I am going to show you guys a very simple keyframe scenario. We're going to start out by creating a sphere.
That's a nice sphere.
That's not bad. And this sphere is going to be located, translate x at a -5. So -5 units and translate x. So you know what? Let's go ahead and jump back over into Maya and do this. I'm going to create a sphere. And let's go ahead and move this around. Come up here to translate x and type in -5. Boom.
Okay, so that sets it to a specific location on the grid.
It does. So look at this, man. That's we're actually set. So what we see right here is the exact same thing that we are seeing back over here on our whiteboard.
All right.
Now, I want, as time passes, for our sphere to move along the translate x axis and to appear over here at a given time. And over here, translate x is going to be equal to a +5.
Gotcha.
Okay, so remember what I said at the very beginning of this lesson. I said, what was animation? I said it was an attribute value that changed over time. Well, guess what? Here we have an attribute value that has changed over what? Time.
Right.
And now we need to define the time. How much time? I don't know. Let's pick on 30 frames. How much time is 30 frames?
That's 1 second.
That's 1 second with our current setting in Maya. So let's come up here just so that we have it written down so that everybody remembers. 30 over 30 frames. So there you go. So now I need to record some keyframes. So I'm going to indicate a keyframe as a big box, if you will.
Okay.
So here we go. Giant box. This is a single keyframe. What is stored inside this keyframe? Well, we're going to store what our frame currently is. So our frame is currently at, and we're going to record the first keyframe at frame 1.
So this is where the animation begins.
That's right. Let's kind of fix that up. There we go. And what is our attribute? Translate x, and what is it currently at? -5. So when we record the very first keyframe, this is what we get.
So we're saying at frame 1, translate x is equal to -5.
That's right. Then we're going to come over here and we're going to say, okay, we're going to advance time. You always advance your time first. Now we're going to say our frame is now equal to what, Zach?
30.
That's right. So we're now at frame 30, and our translate x value needs to be at a +5. There we go. We have how many keyframes?
2.
2. But by creating these keyframes, by creating the very first keyframe, guess what we have done? We have generated a new node in Maya, because this information is stored in this node. So here's the node. Remember how they draw them as big rectangles, right?
Right.
It is an anim curve. Da-da-da. It's an animation curve node.
Right.
And this node contains the data that you have recorded. Basically, at what frame, what was the value, and what are the tangents. And tangents is something we're going to talk about a little bit later when we start talking about interpolation curves.
Sure.
So all of that is being stored in the animation curve node.
So essentially what we told Maya when we placed these keyframes, we said at frame 1, I want translate x to be -5.
That's right.
At frame 30, we now want it to be +5, and the computer now takes that information and says, okay, then that means during that 30 frame time period, a change has to take place.
That's right.
And it creates your animation for you.
That's right. So basically this animation curve node, while holding these two pieces of information, right, in a table that's inside this node, from that it is able to basically create an interpolation curve.
Right.
Which is how we're going to get from this point right here all the way over to this point right here. Excuse my straight line.
Right, over a given amount of time.
That's right. So basically, we can look at this in the graph editor, which is something that we're going to be covering shortly. But I think right now I can go ahead and show you guys kind of a sneak peek at the graph editor, if you will.
A hand-drawn graph
So
editor.
here we go, hand-drawn. This kind of takes you back to the days of simple mathematics.
Oh, sure, good old algebra class.
So here we are with a graph. That's all that matters. It is a graph, okay? And this graph, along the bottom, we are looking at time, as time is going by.
Right.
Over on the side, we're looking at an attribute value. And in this particular case, we are looking at translate x. And its value increases as we go this way.
Right.
Now let's start out right down here at the very bottom and say that this happens to be frame 1, and over here happens to be, well, let's just make that a little tick mark. This over here happens to be frame 30, like such.
Okay.
Now let's say the bottom of our chart over here, we start out at -5, and then we move all the way up to, let's say, somewhere like right here, and this is a +5. So that means right in here you're going to have, what, 2.5, right? Or, excuse me, 0. That's what I meant to say.
I'm with you.
All right, so here we go. So value change, time change. Now, we have a keyframe recorded right here, if we were to look at this on a graph, and we have a keyframe recorded right here, right?
Right.
At frame 30, if you trace it back this way, we have a value of 5. Okay?
Right.
Now, how do we get from this point to this point as we progress through time? Well, that's Maya's job.
Sure.
That's what makes digital animation easy.
Right. This is why keyframe animation is so powerful.
That's right. Maya is going to generate an interpolation curve. So we get this curve that Maya generates for us that goes from one keyframe to another. And we can pretend that's a straight line. Everybody's willing to accept that.
Sure, why not?
So now with this value right here that's changing over time is what is driving the translate x of our ball.
Right.
Okay?
So you could on that graph, you could go to any point in time, say like frame 15, which would be halfway,
frame 15,
and just chart it up.
and if we charted it up, but if I had drawn this a little more straight,
Sure.
we would pretty much come across over here to about 0.
Right.
Like such. There.
Nice.
That's a little closer.
Adjust the curve a little.
So yeah, in this particular case, it would be about frame 17 or so would be equal to 0. But you can see how this works now.
Right.
And these interpolation curves can take on all sorts of shapes the moment you, as the animator, goes into the graph editor and begins manipulating the tangents of our curve. And we're going to look at these tangents coming up a little bit later on in another video.
Right.
All right, so this is pretty cool, right? Now check this out. Translate x. That is only one attribute for our sphere, right?
That's
I mean,
right.
it's got translate y, translate z, we've got
Rotate, scales, visibility,
and the list goes on. For every single attribute that you lay one or more keyframes down on, that attribute gets an animation curve node.
That's right.
Specifically for it. Okay, keep that in mind. I'm about to show you what all this looks like inside of Maya. So what I want to focus on now that we see the basics of what animation is, how to set a key. So how do we record a keyframe? How do we? Well, there's all sorts of ways. The number one way that just about every beginner Maya book out there tells you to do is to hit the magical S key.
Yeah.
That is a lowercase s. That's kind of bad. And in most of the books, they tell you that too, thank heavens. But that is an S, okay?
But it's a good place to start.
And it's a good S. So let's go ahead and come back over here and see what happens. So we are at -5. We are at frame 1. And where does S come from? S is obviously a hotkey for something. Let's come up here and change our menu set over on our status line from modeling to animation. Come up to animate, and look at that. There's our little S. Set key. That's what we're doing here. So let's go ahead, select our sphere, hit S, and keep your eye over here on our channel box. Bloop. Ooh. A couple of things happen. Number one, all of our attributes just received an orangish color, if you will. Take a look down here in our command feedback section.
Result 10.
Result 10. We just had 10 keyframes created. 10 of them.
Wow.
Each keyframe was on a different attribute.
And if we count those up, we have 10 separate attributes.
That we do. That means, following what I was talking about back here, since we only get one animation curve node per attribute, how many animation curve nodes did we just create?
That would be 10.
That would be 10. Let's come back into Maya real quick. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to Window, and I'm going to come down and open up the hypergraph. We talked about this back in the introduction to the user interface section, and we've used it throughout the other lessons since then. So let's open it up. So here we are. There's our nerve sphere node. The first thing that you guys are going to see is that, or you'll notice, is that the sides are now angled.
Right, it's now a parallelogram instead of a rectangle.
It sure is. Why? It's because it's animated. It's a quick giveaway that our item's animated.
Cool.
Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to look at the input and output connections for this transform node.
Brace yourself.
That's right. This means we're going to be looking at what is called the dependency graph. We're going to spend a great deal of time looking at this coming up in a couple of lessons from now, once we get done with Project 1. But here we go. All I'm doing is clicking this button right here. Boom. Wow.
Check it out.
Man, let's see what's going on here, because it's kind of creepy. Let's go ahead and zoom up. And actually, let's just go ahead and maximize, because we don't need to see what's going on back there. We need to see this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Ooh.
We have 10 animation curve nodes. In fact, if you look at the little pop-up thing there, it says nerve sphere 1 _ rotate Z anim curve. Okay, and that is feeding into our transform node right here, into our nerve sphere 1, and it's feeding into the translate Z attribute.
Yep.
So all of our attributes change color to indicate that they're all receiving data coming from other nodes.
Cool.
What do these nodes look like now? Well, let's select, I don't know, we'll do translate, maybe Z, let's
translate
see, X. Here we go. Select them. I'm going to hit Control-A to open up my attribute editor. Now we're looking at the attributes of this node. Take a look at this. What do we have? We have a table in here. And this table stores at what time, and basically that's at what frame, what value was recorded. Let's jump all the way back over to our whiteboard. At what frame, what value was recorded. There we go. It's the first thing. Now, we don't have the second thing yet. So let's go ahead and jump back over here real quick into Maya. Let's minimize this. Let's go ahead and grab our sphere. And remember what I said. We'll go ahead and close the attribute editor for now. We'll open it back up in just a second. We said change your time first.
Right. That's not a coincidence. That's actually the way you have to do this when you're animating with keyframes.
That's right. Otherwise, I'm going to end up just recording over this guy. So we'll move this over to frame 30. I'm going to now come up here to translate X and change it from a -5 to a +5. Boom, jumps over to the other side. So all is good. I'll come up to animate and click on set key. Or, of course, I could just hit A. Look at this.
Or
Result.
S.
Or S, that's what I meant.
Right. Next key over.
Result 10. Okay, what it is, I'm jumping ahead of myself again.
Yeah.
The result 10, does that mean that we have 10 new, and here's where I got the A from, animation curve nodes created?
Yes, it does, actually.
No.
I'm sorry. 10 new keyframes, all on the same animation curve.
Take a look at this. We don't have. So if we take this,
now you got me all confused.
Look at it again. So now we just refreshed everything. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. So we still have only 10 of these animation curve nodes. But let's go and open up the attribute editor for this node right here. So Control A.
Now there's a new entry in that table.
Now we have a new entry. So we had key 0, now key 1, our second key, recorded at frame 30 a value of 5. Let's jump back over to our whiteboard. At frame 30, a value of 5. It's exactly what we see inside the node. Now you see why I drew the box around here, because this is the node.
Sure.
It's just showing it to you in a table format, and I just showed it to you as 2 recording tick marks, if you will, that has the data in them.
Cool.
So we saw that we could hit S to record a key if we'd like, or, of course, you could set key from the menu. But we have a problem with using approach number 1, don't we, Zach?
Yes, we do.
What is that problem?
It's called flatline animation.
That's right. It's called static channels.
Yeah.
So this is what this is producing. This is going to produce a bunch of static, S-T-A-T-I-C.
Yeah.
I can spell, kind of.
I can, too.
Static channels. Right?
Yep.
So, what is a static channel? As Zach just said, it is a flat line. It is an animation curve that has been created. So remember, we talked down here about these curves, right? So here we go. Talked about curves right here. It's a curve that is a flat line. You know, like when someone dies and they hook them up to the old heart monitor thing.
EKG.
Usually you have the, bloop, bloop. So
right,
bloop,
right,
like
right.
that. But then when it goes like that, which is generally a bad thing. That's
Yeah.
when people start putting pedals on you or paddles, and they'll shock you, and then it starts going beep. Oh, my bad.
Get it. I
okay,
get it.
so anyway, so we got this flat line.
Right.
And then you may have keyframes sitting on this flat line, like such, right? The value does not change over time, but Maya has to process this information.
Right. If you look at that graph that we've drawn out, a flat line would mean that the exact same value is being held over an extended period of time.
That's right.
The problem, though, is that since we have a curve, since we actually have these keyframes, we're causing a calculation for Maya to have to read, even though no change is taking place.
That's right. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and show you one. We're not focusing on this right now. I do want you guys to go ahead and see this. We are going to open up the graph editor.
Uh-oh.
The graph editor is where you're going to be working with all of your different interpolation curves that are generated by putting down these keyframes. I'm going to come up here to Window, come down to Animation Editors, and Graph Editor. Now, with the graph editor, let's go ahead and make sure we have our sphere selected. Come over here and take a look at what we have. So here's that little graph that I drew out for you guys over inside the whiteboard. Okay, look at that. Here's our Translate X. As a matter of fact, if I click on Translate X here, it'll hide all the other curves. There we go. There's a little keyframe down here. There's a little keyframe up there, right?
Right.
Man, it looks just like this little drawing right here. Keyframe down here,
yeah.
keyframe up there.
Time across the bottom, attribute value on the side.
See, look at this. We got -6, so -5 is like right here, right between -4 and -6. And at frame 30, we come up here, we go straight across, and we get a +5.
Nice.
And at frame 15, we come up, and we're really close anyways to 0. So kind of about what I had.
If we'd started at frame 0, we would be.
I know, we would be dead on. So anyways, looking at this curve is, well, what's expected. Let's come back up here and select our NURB Sphere 1. Take a look at these other curves. They're flat lines, flat line, flat line, flat line. All these are on top of each other. There is data that needs to be calculated, though. This is not effective.
Right. It's extraneous data that we do not need to calculate.
I mean, think about it. This data must be saved in your file, making your scene bigger. Sure, in this particular case, it's so small. Who really cares?
Yeah.
But what if you were dealing with a character that happened to have 4 arms and
equipment
and tons of fingers and he's juggling, right?
Yeah.
And while he's writing a story and he's using all of his fingers and his limbs. And by the way, I didn't mention to say or whatever that he has 8 legs and tons of toes. So
and he's running from people with knives. Yeah.
Close enough. So now we've got millions of keyframes.
Yeah.
Well, close enough. And if you had tons of flat lines, if you used that S key the entire time for keying everything, what a mess.
Yeah,
now,
you could have tens of thousands of flat animation curves.
Now you really will have a giant file size that's just storing a bunch of data that's useless.
Right.
So what do we need to do? Well, first of all, in here, I could simply delete everything. So let's see. Translate X is right there. So I'm going to grab all of these, hit delete. Ooh, that cleaned things up. I'm going to grab visibility, hit delete. So look at that. I'm now left with only one animation curve feeding into my NURB Sphere 1 transform node. Let's go ahead and close all this and grab our sphere. Look at our coloring.
Which is great, because that's all we actually animated. Or that's the only thing we actually moved anyway.
That's right. So look at this. I drag my time slider back and forth. Just fine.
Yeah, nice.
It's still working exactly the way we expect it to work. So now the question is, well, I don't want to use the S key then.
Right.
I mean, because that's going to... Well, that's okay. There's ways of cleaning up static channels automatically and stuff like that. These are things we can look at a little bit later on. But right now, how can you set a keyframe on a given attribute? Well, this is quite easy, to be honest with you. Let's go ahead and come in here, and I'm going to go ahead and delete by right-clicking and coming over here to delete selected to get rid of that node right there. So now there is no animation. And now let's redo our animation. So let's start out at a -5. And let's go ahead and key this thing. So here's how I like to do it. I'll simply highlight. So in this particular case, we're going to just jump back over here to our whiteboard real quick. And we're going to say method number 2 on how to set a key. In this particular method, what we're going to do is we're going to key the channel.
So we're actually selecting an attribute inside the channel box and using that as a place to lay the key.
That's right. So let's go ahead and jump back over here. So I have selected this channel. See, simply click on it to select it. I can now come up here to Channels and select Key Selected. You'll notice we now have our orange color. Our result down here in our command feedback section is a result of 1. We'll now move our timeline indicator. Like I said, you must change time first, then change your value. So I'll go ahead and type in 5 and hit enter. I'll go ahead and select. This time I'm going to right click, show you another approach.
Sure, it's the exact same menu.
Exact same menu. Come up to key selected. So now I've recorded that, result of 1. Now let's go ahead and come up to window, open up our hypergraph, and look at this. There we are. We're looking at, in fact, I'm going to jump back to the scene hierarchy, just so we'll start at the very beginning again. So here we go. NURB Sphere 1. Show me my input and output connections, and these are the ones we're interested in. There's our animation curve node, only one node, feeding data over to the translate X of this guy. So that's what's controlling translate X, making it an orange color.
So this is already much more efficient.
Absolutely. And we can see that we do indeed have animation. So now, if I wanted to, let's just put, you know, a slight bit of, not a bounce, but just a kind of a hill in it.
Kind of an arc.
So I can now come over here to translate Y and say, I'm going to record it at frame 1 at a value of 0.
Okay.
And over here at 30, I also want it to be at a value of 0. So now translate Y does nothing new.
Right. Actually, it's a flat line.
It's a flat line. Let's take a look at that.
It is
Windows,
a static channel right now.
Animation editors, graph editor. We have two things over here. Translate X is indeed, as seen here, changing, okay, over time. Translate Y, flat line. But let's move this on down. Watch this. Actually, let's move this on up.
Up, down, up, down.
I was just kidding.
Yeah.
There we go. So now what I want to do is come over here to a halfway point, so frame 15. Let's move our guy up. So look at this. We move time first, then we changed our attribute value. I did it by using the move manipulator.
Right.
Okay, now I'm happy with that. So let's go ahead and right-click, key selected.
Ooh.
Look at this. So it's a little black dot, that's a keyframe. See a little black dot, that's a keyframe. See a little black dot, that's a keyframe. So 1 keyframe, 2 keyframe, come over here, 1, 2, 3. What does our animation look like? Well, here we go, up and down. Simple
Very cool.
as that.
Yeah.
That's the basics of keyframe animation. Now, go ahead, Zach.
Well, there's also another way to lay
Talk
down
about
keyframes.
the auto key?
Yeah.
Well, I was going to kind of save that to a little bit later
Right,
on.
we can save it.
We'll save it. Right now, the whole idea of this lesson is just what is keyframe animation and setting up the basics. Don't worry, Zach's getting into the same habit I get into. Get all excited and show you everything.
Show them everything all at once.
So we'll talk about auto keyframing coming up in just a little while.
Cool.
But anyways, let's go and show or hide the graph editor because I really didn't want to show you guys that either. I guess there is one final thing I'm going to show you real quick, and that is, well, two things. How do we update information in a keyframe? Well, let's say I didn't want this to start out at -5 at frame 1. I really wanted it to start out at -10 for whatever crazy reason.
Sure.
All I need to do is make sure my time indicator is where it needs to be first. So here I am at frame 1. Change my attribute value. I've done that.
Right.
And then simply right-click, key select it. Maya is going to detect that there's already an entry in the animation curve node for frame 1. And it's just simply going to update the value. It's going to change it from a -5 to a -10. And now we're going to see this.
And just a real quick thing I wanted to mention, when you're looking at the time slider on the bottom of the screen, you'll notice these keyframes are little red tick marks. If you are located directly on a keyframe with your time slider, you'll get this little very faint cyan line down
so
here
you can
to
still see it.
Yeah, just to show you that you're right on the keyframe. If you don't see that cyan line, you'll actually be creating a new keyframe, not overwriting the one that you're focusing on.
That's right, absolutely. And finally, we can move keyframes around as well. We can just simply hold the Shift key down. Make sure our timeline is on an indicator. So as Zach just said, you see how we have the cyan color. That means we're on this keyframe. Hold Shift, left click. We get a series of arrows, 2 pointing left, 2 pointing right. One set of them is for scaling. The other set of them is for moving. In this particular case, don't worry about the scaling. We'll talk about that stuff later. But I'm going to use my inside arrows, and I can move left. I can move right. And as I do this, I am changing my timing for the animation. So now all I've done now is just simply clicked on my timeline to deselect.
Right.
And look what my animation looks like now. Whoops, let's not grab the whole thing. So now it takes longer to get up and then whoop down real quick. Okay? So the basics of keyframe animation. I can also, the final thing, I want to delete that keyframe. I simply select it by just make sure I'm right on it, right? I can simply right-click and come up here and select delete like such. Notice the keyframe is now gone. I can hit Z, and as you guys saw a second ago, I could simply come over here, highlight, right-click, and select delete, select it, and that gets rid of the keyframe as well.
Very cool.
So this, again, was just an introduction to keyframe animation. The bottom line is this. Keyframe animation is nothing more then the recording of a the recording of an attribute's value at a given point in time. And this information is then stored in an animation curve node inside a table. And Maya, once you have 2 keyframes, will generate an interpolation curve that's going to control how the object, how the attribute value is going to change through that time.
Right. And I do want to stress, for a lot of people who've never animated before, this can seem very overwhelming. So if you're in that boat and you're a little bit intimidated by what we've been talking about, I highly recommend you rewind this video and follow along and actually do these things while we're doing them.
That's right. This is, again, it's just a beginner lesson
Yeah.
to this. There's a lot of things we can do with keyframes and interpolation curves, and we're going to talk about those as we progress throughout this lesson. As a matter of fact, in the coming up lesson, very next lesson, Zach's going to animate our ball bouncing out.
Yep.
Very simple stuff. Very straightforward, but it is going to be using everything that we've shown you here. So with that, that's going to wrap up this video. Thanks a lot, guys.